In what year will the human population grow too large for the Earth to sustain? And the answer is about 1970, according to research by the World Wildlife Fund. In 1970, the planet's 3.5 billion people were sustainable. But on this New Year's Day, the population is 8 billion. Today, wild plants and animals are running out of places to live. The scientists you're about to meet say the Earth is suffering a crisis of mass extinction on a scale unseen since the dinosaurs. We're going to show you a possible solution, but first, have a look at how humanity is already suffering from the vanishing wild. In Washington state, the Salish Sea helped feed the world.
With this weather and the way things feel once I get out here, it's time to be fishing. That's what it feels like.
Commercial fisherman Dana Wilson supported a family on the Salish Sea's legendary wealth of salmon. He remembers propellers churning the water off Blaine, Washington, and cranes straining for the state's $200 million annual catch.
That used to be a buying station. They're gone now. They don't buy anymore. So that building over there used to buy salmon. They don't buy salmon anymore. It's just not here.
In 1991, one salmon species was endangered. Today, 14 salmon populations are foundering. They've been crowded out of rivers by habitat destruction, warming, and pollution. Dana Wilson used to fish all summer. Today, a conservation authority grants rare, fleeting permission to throw a net.
There was a season.
There was a season.
Now there's a day.
There's a day, and sometimes it's hours. Sometimes you might get 12 hours, 16 hours. That's what we're down to.
Here, the vanishing wild scuttled a way of life that began with native tribes 1,000 years ago.
I don't remember anybody doing anything other than salmon fishing.
Fisherman Armando Briones is a member of the Lummi tribe, which calls itself People of the Salmon. He didn't imagine the rich harvest would end with his 5 fishing boats.
All of a sudden you're trying to figure out, well, how am I gonna make that paycheck for my family? Well, for me it was like, well, I have a backup for a backup for a backup for a backup.
Briones' backups include his new food truck, switching to crab fishing, and consulting on cannabis farms. His scramble to adapt is being repeated around the world. A World Wildlife Fund study says that in the past 50 years, the abundance of global wildlife has collapsed 69%, mostly for the same reason.
Too many people, too much consumption, and growth mania.
At the age of 90, biologist Paul Ehrlich may have lived long enough to see some of his dire prophecies come true. You seem to be saying that humanity is not sustainable.
No, humanity is not sustainable. To maintain our lifestyle, yours and mine, basically, for the entire planet, you'd need 5 more Earths. Not clear where they're going to come from.
Just in terms of the resources that would be required.
Resources that would be required, the systems that support our lives, which of course are the biodiversity that we're wiping out. Humanity is very busily sitting on a limb that we're sawing off.
In 1968, Ehrlich, a biology professor at Stanford, became a doomsday celebrity with a bestseller forecasting the collapse of nature. When the population bomb came out, you were described as an alarmist.
I was alarmed. I am still alarmed. All of my colleagues are alarmed.
The alarm Ehrlich sounded in '68 warned that overpopulation would trigger widespread famine. He was wrong about that. The Green Revolution fed the world. But he also wrote in '68 that heat from greenhouse gases would melt polar ice, and humanity would overwhelm the wild. Today, humans have taken over 70% of the planet's land and 70% of the fresh water.
The rate of extinction is extraordinarily high now and getting higher all the time.
We know the rate of extinction is extraordinarily high because of a study of the fossil record by biologist Tony Barnofsky, Ehrlich's Stanford colleague.
The data are rock solid. I don't think you'll find a scientist that will say we're not in an extinction crisis.
Barnowski's research suggests today's rate of extinction is up to 100 times faster than is typical in the nearly 4 billion year history of life. These peaks represent the few times that life collapsed globally, and the last was the dinosaurs, 66 million years ago.
There are 5 times in Earth's history where we had mass extinctions, and by mass extinctions I mean at least 75%, 3/4 of the known species disappearing from the face of the Earth. Now we're witnessing what a lot of people are calling the 6th mass extinction, where the same thing could happen on our watch.
It's a horrific state of the planet when common species, the ubiquitous species that we're familiar with, are declining.
Tony Barnowski's colleague in the study of extinction is his wife, biologist Liz Hadley, faculty director at Stanford's Jasper Ridge Research Preserve in California.
You know, I see it in my mind, and it's a really sad state. If you spend any time in California, you know the loss of water. The loss of water means that there are dead salmon you see in the river right before your eyes. But it also means the demise of those birds that rely on the salmon fishery, eagles. It means, you know, things like minks and otters that rely on fish. It means that our habitats that we're used to, the forests that, 3,000-year-old forests, are going to be gone. So it means silence, and it means some very catastrophic events because it's happening so quickly.
It means you look out your window and 3/4 of what you think ought to be there is no longer there. That's what mass extinction looks like.
What we see just in California is, the loss of our iconic state symbols. We have no more grizzly bears in California.
The only grizzly bears in California are on the state flag?
That's our state mammal, and they're not here anymore.
Is it too much to say that we're killing the planet?
No.
I would say it's too much to say that we're killing the planet, because the planet's going to be fine. What we're doing is we're killing our way of life.
The worst of the killing is in Latin America, where the World Wildlife Fund study says the abundance of wildlife has fallen 94% since 1970. But it was also in Latin America that we found the possibility of hope. Mexican ecologist Gerardo Ceballos is one of the world's leading scientists on extinction. He told us the only solution is to save the 1/3 of the Earth that remains wild. To prove it, he's running a 3,000 square mile experiment. In the Calakmul Biosphere Reserve near Guatemala, he is paying family farmers to stop cutting the forest.
We're going to pay each family a certain amount of money that is more than you will get cutting down the forest if you protect it.
And how much are you paying out every year?
For instance, each family here will get around $1,000.
More than enough here to make up for lost farmland. In total, the payouts come to $1.5 million a year, or about $2,000 per square mile. The tab is paid through the charity of wealthy donors.
The investment to protect what is left is, really small.
The payoff on that investment is being collected on Ceballos' jungle cameras. 30 years ago, the jaguar was very nearly extinct in Mexico. Now Ceballos says they've rebounded to about 600 in the reserve.
There are other places where there are reserves around the world where they've been able to increase the populations of certain species. But I wonder, are all these little success stories enough to prevent mass extinction?
All the big success that we have in protecting forests and recovering animals like tigers in India, jaguars in Mexico, elephants in Botswana, and so on, are incredible, amazing successes. But there are like grains of sand in a beach. And to really make a big impact, we need to scale up this 10,000 times. So they are important because they give us hope, but they are completely insufficient to cope with climate change.
So what would the world have to do?
What we would have to do is to really understand that the climate change and species extinction is a threat to humanity, and then put all the machinery of society, political, economic, and social, towards finding solutions to the problems.
Finding solutions to the problems was the goal 2 weeks ago at the UN Biodiversity Conference, where nations agreed to conservation targets. But at the same meeting in 2010, those nations agreed to limit the destruction of the Earth by 2020, and not one of those goals was met. This despite thousands of studies, including the continuing research of Stanford biologist Paul Ehrlich. You know that there is no political will to do any of the things that you're recommending.
I know there's no political will to do any of the things that I'm concerned with, which is exactly why I and the vast majority of my colleagues think we've had it, that the next few decades will be the end of the kind of civilization we're used to.
In the 50 years since Ehrlich's population bomb, humanity's feasting on resources has tripled. We're already consuming 175% of what the Earth can regenerate. And consider, half of humanity, about 4 billion, live on less than $10 a day. They aspire to cars, air conditioning, and a rich diet. But they won't be fed by the fishermen of Washington's Salish Sea, including Armando Briones. The tribe has been fishing salmon here for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And your generation is seeing the end of that.
It's getting harder and harder. I hate to say it, I don't want to say it's the end of it.
Why do you feel so emotionally attached to this?
It's everything we know. I'm fortunate enough to know where I know a lot of different things. I've done a lot of different things in my life. I've gotten good at evolving and changing. But not everybody here is built like that. And to some of us, this is what they know. This is all they know.
The 5 mass extinctions of the ancient past were caused by natural calamities, volcanoes, and an asteroid. Today, if the science is right, humanity may have to survive a 6th mass extinction in a world of its own making.
The United States has national parks devoted to canyons and deserts, glaciers and geysers, even underwater coral reefs, 63 national parks in all. But somehow, we skipped the American prairie. The grasslands that once stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rockies played a vital role in the lives of Native Americans, white settlers, and an endless variety of wildlife. They inspired explorers and artists, but apparently not park planners. Nearly 20 years ago, a nonprofit organization began trying to fix that, not with a new national park, but rather a huge privately operated nature reserve on the Great Plains, one that would be open to the public, but also a place where buffalo can roam once again. Through a vast stretch of open, and for the moment empty, grassland, Allison Fox is taking us up a muddy 2-track path in search of buffalo.
This road is incredible.
Fox is the CEO of American Prairie, which has, as just one of many audacious goals, the restoration of bison to a landscape they once ruled.
Oh, there.
Oh, there they are.
There, look at that. Wow, there they
Oh,
are.
look at the babies.
Look at that.
Oh.
We found part of what American Prairie calls its conservation herd of about 800 buffalo. This group is mainly mothers with new calves, which are a distinctive shade of red.
Trying to do a count of the babies, but now they've kind of moved the babies into the middle of the group.
This land is like this as far as the eye can see.
As far as the eye can see.
That's not a bad description of the scale of American Prairie's ambition to create the largest nature reserve in the contiguous United States. The nonprofit has more than 50 employees, from fundraisers to buffalo wranglers. Allison Fox has worked there for 15 years and has been in charge for the last 4.
Overall, the goal is to have how many acres in this reserve?
Yeah, the overall goal is about 5,000 square miles, 3.2 million acres of intact grasslands. Comparable to the size of the state of Connecticut, and also comparable to Glacier and Yellowstone National Parks combined.
That's big.
It is big.
The big chunk of land is mostly north of the Missouri River in north-central Montana, one of the most remote parts of the country. It's a patchwork of privately owned cattle ranches and land owned by the government, including a huge existing national wildlife refuge named after the famous cowboy painter Charles M. Russell.
And that 1.1 million acres serves as the anchor of American Prairie's 3.2 million acre vision.
And so you've got these big chunks of federal land and you're buying land in between to try to piece it all together.
Exactly.
So, just about every time a private ranch comes up for sale inside its desired footprint, American Prairie tries to buy it to add another piece to its puzzle and preserve more grassland.
How many ranches have you purchased?
We have purchased 34 ranches.
To buy all those ranches, American Prairie has raised nearly $200 million from more than 4,000 donors, including Wall Street financiers and technology moguls. It says it will take hundreds of millions more and decades more to complete the patchwork.
So this is a long game.
This is a long game, and it's a long game for land acquisition. It's a probably even longer game for the restoration of habitats and species. This area was America's Serengeti, truly America's Serengeti, with tens of thousands of bison, pronghorn, elk, deer, grizzly bears, wolves.
Is that the goal, or is that a goal to restore that?
Yes, to have the ecosystem function fully as it once did.
Charles Russell's paintings portray a romanticized version of what the prairie ecosystem used to look like. Teeming herds of buffalo, Native Americans hunting and living alongside the buffalo, at least until they both were displaced by white settlers and hundreds of thousands of cattle.
It's amazing to think of the people that lived here before us, people and other things. So over this direction, there's quite a cluster of teepee rings, so the Native Americans used to use this. Come on, Ross.
Connie French operates this cattle ranch with her husband Craig, and they are proud of their collaboration with conservation groups. In fact, they graze some of their cattle on a ranch that's been owned by the Nature Conservancy for more than 20 years.
Okay, girl.
But when American Prairie's early leaders came in talking about saving the land, it really rubbed her wrong.
So saving it, yes, but not just tromping over people.
Is that what it feels like?
It does feel like that sometimes, yes. So
they came in like, we know better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You have said that for their vision to become a reality,
mm-hmm.
you and what you do,
mm-hmm.
that you're gone.
Mm-hmm. I guess I can say yes, that's how it feels to us, to me.
Along the few roads slicing through the grasslands here, the signs are everywhere. Save the cowboy. Stop American Prairie Reserve. They make it clear that a lot of Connie French's ranching neighbors share her concern.
What some ranchers have told us is that when you say you want to save the land, what they hear is that you want to save the land from them.
Yeah, no, we are well aware that that word save hit a nerve, and that was not at all our intention. Many of our ranching neighbors are committed to conservation, so if I could pull back that word save, I absolutely would.
American Prairie is now working hard to mend fences with skeptical neighbors. It has a program called Wild Sky, run by a wildlife biologist on its staff, Daniel Kinka.
Wild Sky ranchers are the best at what they do in terms of sustainable ranching.
Wild Sky will pay a rancher up to $15,000 a year for things like modifying fences to make them easier for wildlife to get over or through while still keeping cattle contained. It also pays ranchers to install cameras on their property.
The rancher gets paid for every animal that crosses the path of this camera?
That's correct. You get a coyote, that's $25. A black bear comes behind it, that's $300. 4 or 5 elk come behind it, that's $50. The biggest payouts are for wolves and grizzly bears, $500 per picture per camera per day.
Wolves and grizzly bears aren't on this part of the prairie at the moment. The idea of Wild Sky is that as they and other wildlife do return, payments will help cattle ranchers tolerate them.
Make sure you follow up the calves.
Lance Johnson, a fourth-generation Montanan who runs a cattle ranch with his wife and 2 daughters, is one of 15 Wild Sky ranchers. The cameras on his property have captured enough pictures this year to earn him $6,000, the annual maximum American Prairie will pay for photos of wildlife.
These ranches are so hard to make profitable that if you can figure out any way to supplement your income, then that's probably necessary right now.
Johnson also leases grass and grazes cattle on a ranch owned by American Prairie. So while some of his neighbors see it as a threat, he says that working with it helps ensure his family's future.
You see a place for you and your daughters and your cattle on this land for the foreseeable future.
We hope so. We hope for the rest of our lives that we're there. I want to do everything I can to give our girls that opportunity to have ranching in the future.
American Prairie says it intends to work alongside cattle ranchers for decades to come, and it does have some natural allies in the neighborhood.
The rancher and the wild space, can those two coexist?
Yeah, they can and they are. Happening right now.
Mark Azure was born and raised on the Fort Belknap Reservation, which is adjacent to where American Prairie is assembling its reserve. He's a former president of the reservation's tribal council, made up of members of 2 tribes, the Nakota and the Ani.
Is there any recollection of what this land was like before the white settlers came? Like the wildlife?
Yes, it was plentiful. Millions and millions of buffalo and antelope and deer and prairie dogs, black-footed ferrets, elk.
The tribes at Fort Belknap began building their bison herd nearly a half-century ago, and it's now more than 1,000 animals. Mark Azure took us out to see part of the herd, which roams across a huge pasture on the reservation.
So they're just scattered out doing what buffalo do, and that's eat the grass and right now enjoy the weather.
The tribes benefit economically from selling some buffalo meat. But you can see in the symbols used during native ceremonies that their value is much greater than money.
We know the history of the tribes and the buffalo, and they were one and the same. To come out here and get on the prairie and see a herd of buffalo, you can kind of leave that world for a little bit and reconnect with that lifestyle that my ancestors lived years ago. Might be just a little bit, but it's there.
Some ranchers fear that the tribes and American Prairie will let their buffalo roam free as they once did.
You use the term free, and I always argued that point because there's a fence somewhere. There has to be a fence somewhere. But as much room as we can give them to roam, then within that context, they'll be free. But not like it was 200 years ago. And we understand that.
Still be a place where you can come and see the buffalo roam.
Absolutely.
American Prairie encourages people to visit the land it owns. It operates campgrounds and has built huts and yurts that anyone can reserve. It allows hunting on many properties, which helps to build support among Montanans.
Across the West, you see more and more no trespassing signs. We've talked a lot about wildlife and wildlife habitat, but certainly providing access for people to appreciate, learn from, recreate on this land is a really important part of what we're doing as well.
The debate over American prairie is often framed as an either-or. Either there are cattle or buffalo. If preservationists win, ranchers lose. What we found across these wide expanses of grass were much more subtle shades of green.
You know, when a new group comes in, new folks, new neighbors, it takes some time to learn if it's legit.
What I think I hear you saying is they have to earn your trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so far they have not.
No, that trust isn't given lightly.
With the size of the state of Montana and the herds of cattle, hundreds of thousands of animals in this state, I don't think buffalo will ever compete. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying, with American Prairie, take a section of land in the state and return it back as best we can to what it was 200 years ago.
It's a huge section of land.
Still not bigger than Montana. I think there's room here for both.
Mozambique's Gorongosa National Park was the envy of Africa. Wildlife drew tourists from around the world. But beginning in the 1960s, a man-made catastrophe slaughtered the animals until it was said there was nothing left but mosquitoes and landmines. In 2008, we followed an American entrepreneur who dreamed of returning a wasteland to greatness. Now, 14 years later, Greg Carr has something to show the world, and we couldn't resist a return to Gorongosa when Carr sends invitations like this.
Just come and sit at a sunset by the lake in the center of this national park. I mean, time stops. And you get 100 colors of yellow and 100 colors of orange, and then the dusk sets in. And then a flock of birds go over the water, and there's a hippo over there making a noise. And there's an impala over there. And, you know, it's like, well, I could have been here 100,000 years ago, and it might have been the same.
Greg Carr's wonder is almost like disbelief. 1 million acres of Africa reborn.
When I first came here in 2004, I could drive around with my Mozambican friends all day long. And if we were lucky, maybe we'd see one baboon or one warthog or something. Now, we drive around, and it's an ocean of wildlife. You know, come around the corner, there's a herd of elephants. You know, go the other direction, there's some lion cubs. 10,000 water buck, and I say to myself, you know what, nature can rebound.
The rebound is in Southeast Africa, near the center of Mozambique. Here, 28 years of war from the 60s to the 90s killed an estimated 1 million people and wiped out 95% of the wildlife in Gorongosa for food and profit. As the war raged in the 1980s, Greg Carr was a tech entrepreneur who'd made a fortune perfecting voicemail. He quit business to devote himself to human rights, and in 2004 he met Mozambique's president, Joaquim Chissano, who made a wild pitch.
And he said, look, please come to Mozambique and help us, and we want to restore our national park.
When we flew over this, I said, this is it.
When we met Carr in 2008, his nonprofit foundation had signed a 20-year contract with Mozambique. His plan was to import animals from all over Africa.
Well, step one, we had to remove 20,000 traps and wire snares that were left in this park, left over from the war. Get rid of all those, because When I first came here, I mean, we think we had 5 or 6 lions, maybe.
In 1,000,000 acres.
In 1,000,000 acres. And the lions that we did have, most of them had 3 legs because they'd stepped in a trap or something. And then second, some of the species were just gone completely. So we went on a process. First bring in the herbivores. So we bring in 200 buffalo. We bring in 200 wildebeest, we bring in some zebra. And then when you got enough herbivores, then you're gonna want the carnivores back. So we reintroduced leopards, we reintroduced hyenas. The lions, all by themselves, their numbers just took off. So from 5 or 6 lions when we started, we now have probably 200.
Gorongosa's lion conservation is urgent because since 1950, Africa's lion population has fallen from 500,000 to 20,000 due to habitat loss and hunting. We saw how Gorongosa is protecting its lions on a mission with park veterinarian Antonio Paulo.
Okay, I'll shoot now.
Paulo fired a tranquilizer dart
right on target.
And a 300-pound lioness led us on a chase.
Reverse, give space, turn around, turn around.
She left us behind, but she couldn't outrun the sedative.
There she is.
Yeah, she's there, she's sleeping.
She'd be out about an hour as Dr. Paulo changed her failing GPS collar. The signal goes to headquarters where they track the prides and herds. A bit of ear was nicked for genetic tests, and then there was a surprise.
You think she's pregnant?
Yeah, she's look like pregnant.
And there is the future of the park.
Yes, the future cubs of the park. Yeah.
Later, she awoke and headed out with her future cub.
I never imagined it would go so well or so fast. In 2018, we did an aerial survey, so counting only the big animals. We counted 100,000 large animals from the air.
Thrilled as he is, it wasn't wildlife that drew this 63-year-old Idaho native to Africa. In 2008, he introduced us to the 200,000 people living around the park, survivors of the wars, living on $1 a day.
People had nothing. I mean, they didn't have clothes. They were wearing rags, or they had made clothes out of tree bark. They were eating insects and trying to catch mice. And, that's when it struck me. Well, this national park's going to have to help the people.
Today, Gorongosa National Park employs 1,600 workers. Tourism brings in cash, which goes to the people and to the park. And Greg Carr has partnered with the government on health care and education. Carr is the biggest donor, but U.S. foreign aid kicks in about $6 million a year.
We now work in 89 primary schools, which is every single school that surrounds this national park. We're training 600 school teachers right now. Now think about how difficult it is to create a school system when you don't have school teachers that know how to read and write because of generations of war. Now something we really focused on as step one was really vulnerable girls. Now, a lot of times what happens in the poor families around here, a girl turns 13 or 14 and the family says, well, it's time for her to get married. Now, it may not be what they actually want, but they don't think there's another choice. And this is what happens, and she marries a farmer and that's it. So we started something called the Girls Club.
There are 3,000 girls in 92 after-school clubs. The program is led by Larissa Souza.
Why is this the job of a conservation park?
Why not? It should be the job for everyone. For everyone. Education is for everyone.
What's it?
The clubs provide the resources to get the girls into high school. And it gives students an answer to our question, which 5 years ago wouldn't have made sense. What do you want to be?
Profesora.
We have a teacher, a nurse, a conservation park ranger, and another nurse.
Another nurse, yes. When we started the program, they didn't know that they had this choice.
And now they do.
Now they do.
This land belongs to these people. They've been here forever. It's their animals, it's their land, it's their trees, it's their cultural and spiritual heritage, right? It's an idea that came from my hero, Nelson Mandela. And the idea was to create a human rights park. You know, what does that mean, right? A park that cares about the people, a park that belongs to the people. So instead of a park turning its back on the people, a park opening itself to the people and say, this is your park, these are your animals, these are your opportunities.
We saw those opportunities on Mount Gorongosa, which was stripped of trees during the wars. Here, CAR's nonprofit foundation is giving away coffee trees. 868 family farmers working for themselves are earning far more than ever, so they can't plant trees fast enough, which reforests the mountain. CAR's foundation buys the beans at above the market rate and built the farmers a roasting plant. There's no better example of CAR's model for lifting people and healing the wild. It's working, but the last 14 years haven't been sweet music alone.
Since we were here in 2008,
yes,
there have been enormous roadblocks to this project.
That's right. If I had known then what was going to come.
What came was another civil war in 2013, and then in 2019, a cyclone leveled 100,000 homes.
Okay, there was the 6 years of war, and then the cyclone. When Cyclone Idai hit, basically every one of our employees became a first responder. So, in other words, oh, there's an elephant right there.
Well, there certainly is.
I just have to stop and say hello to the elephant.
We couldn't find the wildlife in 2008.
And now they're interrupting our interview.
And now they're walking in on the interview.
Well.
Was there ever a time that you thought to yourself, I did my best, but this just isn't going to be humanly possible?
Not for a second. Not for 1 second.
With the cyclones, with the return of the Civil War.
I just think every time something like that happens, it just makes you more determined, not less determined. And when you've got people suffering in a war that need help, or people suffering in a cyclone that need help, you know, you're more committed. You don't lose commitment at a time like that.
We saw commitment in the rangers who protect the park. For the flora and the fauna, they sing, we will die for our park. Part of what they protect are endangered species, including this mammal with a bottomless taste for termites. Pangolins are hunted for their scales, which are prized in folk medicine. Veterinarian Mercia Angela told us that pangolins ride on their mothers' backs.
Oh, hello there.
But we found any back will do.
That's funny. He just naturally goes right up to the shoulder and hangs on your back.
Yeah.
Powerful tail.
Yeah, the tail is very powerful. They also use for protection.
I'm surprised they're so docile. I mean, this is a wild animal.
Yes, it's a wild animal.
Success, eh?
But for us, the most interesting animal in the park
Gorongosa, oye!
is Greg Carr, an entrepreneur with the empathy to see, the humility to listen, and the optimism to act. His business model is creating a new ecosystem where animals that were hunted are suddenly worth much more alive.
How much of your personal fortune have you put into this?
Well, I'd like to keep that a secret, but unfortunately, I think, you know, you could probably do the math and figure it out. It's more than $100 million. My message to anybody with money is, I mean, what are you going to do? Stick it all in your casket? I mean, why not, you know, why not enjoy the joy of philanthropy? I would say to the billionaire next door, go out and enjoy spending your money to help some people.
Find your Gorongosa.
Go find your Gorongosa, and it will bless you more than you can possibly ever bless it.
There are more than 75,000 wild horses roaming public land in the West. Wild horses are the descendants of domesticated horses, the first brought here by Spanish explorers 500 years ago. By 1971, their numbers were dwindling, and Congress stepped in, passing a law to protect this romantic fragment of our history. It worked, almost too well. Today, federal land managers say the number of wild horses is nearly 3 times what it should be, and left unchecked, their population can double every 5 years. So when we heard about a program in Wyoming designed to rein in the wild horses and an unlikely group of men, we headed west. It's hard to imagine anything surviving on this stretch of badlands in northern Wyoming. Sagebrush blankets the high desert all the way to the Rocky Mountains. But in this empty quarter of the cowboy state is a thundering herd of mustangs. Untouched, wild, and breathtakingly beautiful. But wild horses can also wreck the rangelands they roam. Government land managers say in the West, wild horses are competing with cattle and wildlife for increasingly scarce water and food, and their overpopulation often further strains the environment. So the Federal Bureau of Land Management regularly rounds up wild horses, mainly by using small helicopters to locate, capture, and truck them off to corrals or enclosed pastures like this one. A horse can live for about 20 years, and most of these horses will remain here until they die. The Wind River Wild Horse Sanctuary outside Lander, Wyoming, is run by Jess Oldham and his family. Talk about the horses that are here. For most of them, this is it, right?
Yes, ma'am. We have the 225 long-term residents and
Long-term residents.
long-term residents.
Sounds like a nursing home.
That's what I call them. I mean,
Yeah.
they're part of our family, and they're going to be here long-term.
And there they go.
Yes, ma'am.
The 1,400-acre facility is on an Indian reservation. The Oldhams are one of dozens of contractors paid by the government to feed and care for mustangs after they've been removed from the wild. Activists want the horses to remain free.
Why not just let the wild horses be wild and run?
The harsh reality is ecosystems are a delicate balance of each species coexisting together in the environment. There is a limited amount of resources in grass, in water, and the wild horses are a very dominant species. They're smart, they're fast, they eat a lot of food, and they need to be properly managed.
Keeping count of all those horses is Holly Waddell, the division chief of the program that oversees wild horses for the Bureau of Land Management.
How many wild horses is the government now caring for?
So we are currently caring for over 57,000 wild horses.
And caring for them is not inexpensive.
No. The cost of care for wild horses in our off-range corrals and pastures was 2/3 of our budget last year, which was a little over $70 million.
$70 million to care for the wild horses.
Taxpayer dollars.
To relieve some of the burden on taxpayers, last year the Bureau says 3,742 Mustangs came off the government rolls through an incentive program that pays individuals $1,000 to adopt one. Wild horses attract relatively few takers, but these horses did, picked for their youth, balance, and temperament that are sent to be trained in, of all places, prisons like the Wyoming Honor Farm. It's a 640-acre compound of tidy buildings, manicured lawns, cattle, and enough hay to feed them. It may look like a dude ranch, but this is a state-run minimum security prison with felons working the land and the horses. There are no towers or armed guards. A simple 4-foot cattle fence marks the perimeter between the prison and the town of Riverton, Wyoming.
You know, Wyoming has a tendency to do things a little differently because we're a smaller state, and I think it's one of those things, until you see it, you can't actually believe it yourself.
Curtis Moffett has spent his entire career in corrections. He's the warden on the farm, and about the only one here who doesn't wear cowboy boots to work.
The thing that struck me, when you drive up, you see the 4-foot-high cattle fence. What's to stop an inmate from making a run for it or riding off into the sunset?
Realistically, himself. Most of these guys are at the end of their sentence, so most of them don't want to destroy that or, catch another number, do another 5 years or so. It's on them to make sure that they're going to do things the right way.
Most inmates have earned the right to be here, transferred for good behavior from more restrictive state prisons. And each day, about 30 inmates report to work in a maze of chutes and pens with wild horses weighing up to 1,000 pounds. Their job is to transform these Mustangs from wild burdens of the state into riding horses that can fetch thousands at auction.
These guys are here to do their time, but it's really about changing their life, put a change in them in a positive direction.
Travis Shootman is the cowboy in charge. He's the manager of the farm.
Come on, beauty queens.
Shootman spent his life teaching the art of training horses. It shows in a stride kinked by old fractures.
Have you ever had a halter on this horse, Mr. Sukor?
Never.
And a voice both firm and calm, as much for the inmates as the horses.
Do the rope-a-dope and throw the rope into your hand. Do not get kicked.
It takes time to train a wild horse, but Shootman says there's nothing special about how it starts.
You walk them in there like you just kind of rip off the Band-Aid and a human goes in there. Don't chase him.
Whoa.
What's the next step?
Then you teach them to yield the pressure, so you stop the forward movement. Teach them that if they move forward towards you, the pressure goes away. And then from there, you get to where you can touch them, you get to where you can pet them, introduce a halter, get them halter broke, and then you have that trust. Like they understand if they give up their right of flight to stay with you, there's some trust there.
Are you talking about the horses or the
The
inmates?
horses.
Get going, hey.
We are in the people business, and helping the horses is extra, but the guys really learn a lot of life lessons from the horses. They learn to try, they learn to not lie to themselves about their feelings, they learn to control whether it's the highest of high emotions or the lowest of low emotions.
No one here breaks a horse. The method used at the farm is called gentling. Force is replaced by patience, persistence, and an even keel.
Good job. Right here.
In any pen, on any day, you can see it play out. A ballet in dusty boots. A delicate dance of inches, repeated 100 times over. Days in the making for this, the first human touch. Next door, a Mustang in full gallop. A runaway train yields and stops on command.
There you go. You got a good win.
We're watching all these things step by step by step, but this doesn't happen overnight.
No, sometimes it'll take 4 weeks, sometimes it'll take 4 months to do these steps, and a wild horse takes a little bit longer sometimes.
Michael Davis has been riding horses his whole life. He's serving 15 to 20 years for voluntary manslaughter. He's eligible for parole in a little over 3 years.
If you're mad, if you're scared, that horse knows before you ever even touch him. You know, that how they know, I don't. You have to control your feelings considerably with the horse because it is so easy for them to pick up on your mood.
So you're good at controlling your feelings with the horse, but with people, how are you doing?
Not real great.
We're still working
I have
on
my
that.
moments. I'm still working on it, but we're getting better.
Davis is an old cowboy and one of only a few inmates here who can handle this. This horse has never had a man on its back until now.
Hey. Whoa.
A remarkable skill that can't be acquired without a few scars.
I've got broken ankle, a separated shoulder, a broken collarbone, ditches in my head, broken hand, fingers, lots of fingers.
What's the program taught you? What's it meant to you?
A little piece of freedom. I mean, I'm wearing boots and jeans instead of hospital scrubs. And I mean, it's hot out here, but it's a good hot. It's as close to being outside as I can get until I get outside.
Out here, it's easy to forget this is a prison with 300 inmates under the watchful eye of Warden Moffat.
People at home will say, like, these guys are felons. They've done terrible things, committed awful crimes, ruined families. Why should they be allowed to be out here, to be trusted, to be working with these horses?
We don't provide the sentence to them. We don't provide the punishment for them. The judge decided all that. Our job is to supervise them while they're in here. And hopefully return them to society where they're responsible individuals, where they can be law-abiding citizens. I think this program goes a long way to do that. And I want to make sure they get out and we can believe that they're going to be successful and they aren't going to reoffend.
You want to make sure, right, that the horses aren't returned and the inmates don't return.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
Right.
In Wyoming, the recidivism rate is below 30%, And if you're wondering about that 4-foot cattle fence, well, the warden says in the last 22 years, fewer than 10 inmates have made a run for it.
Come back down to a walk.
Staying on the right side of the fence is not lost on Peyton Sukor, an inmate serving 7 to 10 years for aggravated assault. He transferred from a maximum security prison a year ago and came here with no experience working with horses.
What's it like to step into a pen the first time with a wild 800-pound horse?
Adrenaline, heart-pounding excitement. But I was excited to do it because once you get a horse to go the direction you want and then come and join up to you and you turn around and he's right there and it's like, wow, this animal, this connection, this feeling, I can't explain it.
What has this taught you about yourself?
It's taught me responsibility. It's taught me what I want to do for a career when I get out of here. And this makes you look at life a whole different way. Whoa.
And Sukor's patience and feel are paying off. At auction, a gelding like this one could sell for thousands, but it's not without a little heartache.
Is it hard to see them go?
It is, but at the same time, we're not doing this just for us. We're doing it for them too. It's a second chance for them as well.
Have you ridden him without a tie down?
Yes, ma'am.
This September, the Honor Farm held its second auction of the year. Hundreds of buyers came to the prison from all over the country to inspect these horses and query their trainers, a little like kicking the tires on a car lot.
Hit $500 now, make it 5, make it 5, anybody put them at 5.
Then, each Mustang takes the main stage, trotting and loping, sold to the highest bidder.
Sold out, $2,500. All right, here we go.
In all, 34 horses fetched $65,000 for the Bureau of Land Management, an achievement almost as good as the look on the inmates' faces. But remember Michael Davis, the old cowboy who couldn't be bucked? We noticed he wasn't at the auction. The warden told us he was suspended for not getting along with others. Gentling a horse and rehabilitating the man don't always happen on the same clock. By high noon, every Mustang had a new home. And for this wild bunch, gentling has its virtues.
I think I know the answer to this. If you were a betting man, would you bet a psychologist is quicker to change the behavior of a man, a doctor, a therapist, or a horse?
I think a horse, 100%. And that's just purely Travis Shootman talking, but the horses are a major role in what betters those men. They can teach you life lessons every step of every way. Teach you that you got something in you that you didn't think you had. They can teach you that it's okay to be afraid, but it can still be done. Nothing's impossible. There's so many life lessons.